Fun fact, did you know that about 30% of all questions that come up in a CFE are repetition from prior years? These are just some of the things that you're going to learn in this webinar. We're going to cover a lot of things about the CFE and what AEOs come up and how is the best way to prepare for it. Here's a quick agenda of what we're going to cover today. Once we go through this webinar, we're going to learn how the May CFE went on, what AEOs came up, as well as where we are right now in terms of what content is being tested on a CFE, what kind of questions come up over and over, and what is the best method of preparing for the September CFE. I don't know if everybody here knows who I am, but here's the thing. CPA exams are quite difficult, and it shouldn't be a surprise to a lot of you who made it through the PEP modules. And because the CPA exams are so tough, students often seek for someone to help them. And that's where I come in. I'm essentially a CPA exam coach. My name is GevorgCPA, and I'm one of the most recognized CPA exam experts in Canada. I have a ton of experience in the CPA field and educational field. I'm an accounting professor based in Vancouver in Canada. I have volunteered and worked with CPA Canada on several bases. I've just put my credentials out there for you guys to take a look at, and I've been featured in the news. So you can trust the information I'm giving you is actual and is coming from the source of knowledge. And I do consider myself an exam expert. In my program, in my CPA prep program, about 60% of the students come from the PEP module. About 30% are coming from international routes, for example, internationally trained accountants. About 10% are taking the master's. So whatever your background is, I have a feeling you fit in one of those categories. And if you are in this category, then this webinar will be useful to you. So let's get to it. Let's talk about the May CFE. It was a unique exam. So even before the exam happened, I knew it was going to be unique because, as you knew, only part of the country was writing it. And also the fact that we're in the middle of pandemic and it was in hotel rooms, we knew it was going to be a little bit of a challenge. So only Western and Atlantic provinces were writing, and a lot of people didn't really understand the magnitude of this change. If I were to put it on a pie chart, you will see that about 65% of all candidates are in Ontario and Quebec. So there was very few people writing this exam. So I'm curious to see how the exam results for this May will be different compared to prior years. I don't know. I don't have any predictions regarding that, but it is a little bit different. And I'm curious to see how it will turn out. So for your exam that you're writing in September, of course, all provinces are probably going to participate. I mean, there's nothing official, but the registration has opened. So for you, it'll be the entire pie. Everybody will be writing that exam. At this moment, I don't know what the pass rate is. We'll find out a little bit later. And the fact that it was in hotel rooms didn't really change much. The students already knew from prior September exam what it feels like to write in a hotel room. So it was not really a big deal. A couple of new things for this CFE were that there were new competencies that were going to be tested, which is called DAIS. DAIS stands for Data Analytics and Information Services. It is a new competency that CPA Canada added. One of the other changes for this CFE was that the exam didn't have the financial statements for day 2 preloaded. So those are like some of the things that were different about this CFE, but I'm happy to say that nothing went wrong. It actually was smooth sailing, and it was very similar to the past exams. In fact, the same strategies that you would apply in the previous CFEs work for this one as well. Let's debrief the May CFE and see what kind of questions came up. It happened just a few days ago, so this is all fresh information, and let's see how it will impact you for the September CFE writers. Let's begin with the day 1, then we'll do day 3, day 2, and then day 3. So WDI was the waste disposal company case that came up in day 1. We had 4 strategic issues. They covered investment, selling, building, and partnership. This is very classical. From my experience of what comes up on the day 1 of the CFE, those sort of questions are very common. I was not surprised to hear that there were 4 issues because occasionally there are 3, but this time there were 4. And the fact that you have multiple options, like in point number 2, that was a big deal. So for anybody who's not aware how this whole thing works, in capstone 1, you're going to get this waste disposal company, which is your capstone 1 case. And in day 1 of the CFE, they're going to change that company up a little bit. They're going to have new strategic issues. And your job for day 1 is to tackle the new issues and then recommend on it. And that's about it. That's how you pass day 1. So those are the new issues that they presented. And if you knew how to approach day 1 and if you knew how to do the analysis, you should have been okay. There were 2 operational issues about drivers and some board of director. Again, this is very, very typical. I'm not surprised by the results at all. And for your exam in September, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those questions were very similar to this. They're again going to give you about 4 strategic issues. They're going to say, oh, this new investment that we're pursuing, this new partnership, and you have to analyze it qualitatively and quantitatively. I'm going to give you some strategies on how to prepare for day 1, day 2, and day 3 a little bit later, but keep this in mind. Let's look at DHC for the repeat writers who are writing the DHC case. Again, we had 4 issues, and the issues were quite similar to the WDI. We had an investment issue in the hotel, a question on how to renovate, a proposal, and a conversion of the Ontario hotel. More or less, the approach to all those questions was the same. You had to discuss quantitatively, should we go ahead with this proposal or not, and qualitatively, which option works best. And from operational perspective, there was only one question, which was on the advisory board. Here's the top feedback I got on day 1 from students. They said that it was quite easy to find the requireds. The quants, on the other hand, were pretty tough. The students found that the quants were a little bit tricky, and it was not very obvious how you're supposed to tackle those quants. Also, time management was a big challenge for students. They felt like the cases were really long. So please be prepared to manage your time really well on day 1. And although CPA Canada says that day 1 is not supposed to be time constrained, it seems like it is. It seems like that a lot of students are struggling on time, so be prepared for it. In addition to the strategic and operational issues, there's a big picture or constraint issue that you have to take care of in day 1. In this day 1, the big picture issue was a little bit indirect. It was not very obvious. This big picture issue is essentially a big problem that a company is facing. For example, a cash flow constraint, a dividend issue, or IPO. And you're supposed to talk about it in all your recommendations, in your operational issues. And if you miss the big picture, you're not going to pass day 1. So watch out for it. Try to keep in mind what are those big picture issues, and remember to write about them in your recommendations. The appendices, as always, give you what the issues are. That's one of the strategies that I teach to students. When you're writing your day 1 of the CFE and you're not sure what the issues are, just look at the appendices. If you have like 5 appendices, it's very likely that each one of them is an issue. One of them will probably be the financial statements, but the other ones will be an issue. So be careful. Look at the appendices if you're not sure if it's truly an issue or not. And look at the last bullet point that I have on my screen there, the split screen. I think that's a really nice trick that you can try yourself. I don't know if you're going to use Word and Excel in your exam. I'll talk more about what my prediction is for the September CFE as far as the format goes. But if you're going to use Word, it was a really good idea to use the split screen function in day 1. The reason is that you begin the day 1 case by talking about situational analysis, things like key success factors, SWOT, mission, and vision. That's on top of your memo. And then down later in your memo, you can write the strategic issues, but you got to integrate. And integrate means to pull it from the situation analysis into your major issues. And for you to be able to see those issues and to avoid scrolling up and down all the time, it's a really good idea for you to split your screen in Microsoft Word and make it a little bit tinier on the top section. And then you can quickly look it up there and then write it down on your strategic issues. Hopefully that makes sense. If you don't understand, feel free to leave a comment in the chat and I'll get back to you on that. And I'm going to tell you what strategies I do suggest that you employ for the September exam from what we learned here. So don't worry about finding required. It is going to be easy. And I do recommend practicing a lot of day 1 cases to get good at quants, specifically at quants, because I'm finding that those quantitative analyses are getting tougher and tougher year over year, and a lot of students are struggling with it. So it is a really good idea to practice a lot of day 1 cases, even practicing prior day 1 cases, which I'll talk more about a little bit later. When Capstone 2 begins, if you are in Capstone 2 already, you're going to get 3 versions of your day 1 case. For example, if you're writing the WDI case, in Capstone 2, you'll have 3 versions of WDI, but even that's not enough. Just 3 practice versions is really not enough. So I do recommend getting even more cases for day 1 and practicing, especially the quants. And just about writing in a hotel room, most students told me that they felt pretty safe. There were no problems. And it was a little bit dark writing in hotel rooms. So they tried moving a lamp, but it didn't really work. And I remember one student told me that in one of the hotels, they had a glass table. So they didn't have a mouse pad. So it was really tough to control your mouse. So a pro tip, take a mouse pad with you if you're going to be writing in a hotel room in your exam. Again, we'll find out when it's officially announced, and I'll make sure to put in the description of this video what the official format will be. But if you're writing in a hotel room, it will be a little bit dark. And I have a really awesome strategy for when it's dark in a hotel room. Like, what are you supposed to do when it's dark in a hotel room? Here's a strategy. Okay, I'm just joking to lighten you up a little bit. That's not really a strategy. Okay, so let's talk about day 2 now. So day 2 is always a flip of a coin. this table shows what are the past competencies that came up for day 2. And people were really hoping that it's going to be an ASPE case, because if you notice the GAAP competency, it goes IFRS, IFRS, ASPE, IFRS, IFRS, right? So it's kind of 2, 2, 2. And people were praying for an ASPE case, but it was IFRS, unfortunately. So you got to be ready for both of them. The pattern has been broken now. So for your exam, I really don't know if it's going to be ASPE or FRS. It's any bet, anyone could be it. So let's take a look specifically of what came up in day 2. So we had 4 FR issues in day 2, and it was IFRS, as I mentioned. So we had IFRS 15, an intangible asset, which was a very easy question, by the way, investment property, and something called non-GAAP measures. We also had variance analysis from MA and also break-even analysis. So what do you think, guys? Do you think these are easy questions or are they hard? I think it's pretty easy. Like, don't you think? Out of all those questions there, if I had it in my exam, I think I could take care of all of them except that non-GAAP measure. That's a real weird one, right? And someone just put it in a chat, what is non-GAAP measure? And trust me, everybody was asking that question during the exam. And I did kind of look into it. This is what the question was saying. It was saying, the management told you that a lot of businesses use non-GAAP accounting, and the case was asking you to explain why and what is non-GAAP accounting. And people were like, what the hell? What is non-GAAP accounting? I've never seen it. Can you even test me on it? Yes, they can test you on it. This is the CPA competency map, which is the rule book for what's going to be on exam. And I highlighted there the non-GAAP measures. It is in the competency map, so it is fair game. They had all the rights to test you on it. And essentially, non-GAAP measure are all the measures that businesses use that are not covered in GAAP. For example, EBITDA. If you ever look at management discussion and analysis of any publicly traded company, for example, the MDAs, you will see in there on the notes in the MDA, they say we use non-GAAP measures, for example, EBITDA. So there are a lot of metrics that a businesses use depending on their industry. For example, in construction industry where I used to work, we use something called backlog. Backlog is a non-GAAP measure of all our sales that we haven't completed yet. So every time a business uses something like that, that's called a non-GAAP measure. So your job was to briefly explain it and say how this non-GAAP measure can be applied to this specific company. I wouldn't recommend to go into too much depth into this or like give 50 examples. A brief explanation, an analysis, and some suggestions followed by recommendation would have been the best approach for this one. But if you're still worried about non-GAAP measure, I got good news for you. It's very likely that the same question will not repeat at the very next CFE. It may repeat maybe in 2 CFEs. So I think if you're writing in September 2021, you should be okay. It's probably not going to come up. But the lesson here is that you should know these things as well. It could come up. All right, let's look at the role component for day 2. So I have summary for assurance and PM. Sorry, nothing for PM for tax and finance. For assurance, these are the questions that came up. Pretty classical, right? I don't know if it's I don't know if it's hard for a lot of you guys, but audit plan memo, very classical. You know how I said in the beginning that 30% of all questions repeat over CFEs? This is one of them. Audit plan memo is probably going to come up on your CFE because it does come up at every CFE. So that was pretty easy in my opinion. The audit errors was pretty easy. Procedures were expected. WR was expected. So you know what, if you're on the fence about what role you have to choose for CFE, I always say take assurance, even if you've never worked in assurance, because it's got the less technicals to study and most of those questions do repeat year over year. Okay, let's take a look at the PM now, which is also one of the popular roles that come up. So those are the questions that came up. It was about pricing, outsourcing, SWOT, board issues. Again, very classical PM issues. I've seen this come up a dozen of times. If you study those topics, you should be okay for day 2 as well. This is very classical, nothing really surprising there. Well, someone asked in the chat, what does CAT stand for? It stands for Computer Assisted Auditing Techniques. Let's take a look at the next slide of what are the common feedback, common challenges that students found in day 2. They said it was tough. They said, do you want me to know what non-GAAP measure is? What is this all about? I've never seen it in my life. So they were surprised by it. But some of the other students that it was quite easy. There was not a lot of challenge. It was expected and they tackled it pretty well. So here's my strategy. So what I propose what you should study for your day 2. Focus on complex, non-routine FR questions. And if you're thinking right now, what is a complex, non-routine FR issue? Don't worry, I got you. Here's a table of complex, non-routine issues. And I would suggest to get your snippeting tool out right now and taking a screenshot of this because you'll probably want to study all those things. And as I promised, this is going to be on YouTube. So if you don't take a snippet, don't worry about it. It's not too bad. But anyways, there's about 16 topics in here, which I believe are complex, non-routine topics. I highly advise that you study all of them to be ready for day 2. I can tell you that you're probably going to get complex, non-routine topic on your day 2 in September. So please study all those topics that you have on your screen right there. Okay. I'm just going to go back one slide and talk about the other topics, and I'll come back to this. So I also recommend for your CFE to practice every day 2 case. We have 7 day 2 cases so far. I do believe that a lot of those questions repeat year after year, as I said many times. For example, the audit plan memo. So if you do the past cases, you'll have a higher chance of getting good marks in your day 2 exam, okay? And also you must understand the CFE and the passing profile. And the reason you must understand the passing profile is that if you think that you have to study everything to pass the CFE, you're wrong. There are very specific things that they test you on in each of the days, and you got to study those specific things. For example, in day 2, it's only FR, MA, and your role. So I often get that question from students, should I be studying, let's say, finance, every topic in finance? No, you don't have to do it. It's not going to come up on your CFE, so there's no point. Just focus on the passing profile and on the questions you're going to get on your CFE. And of course, manage your time. Time management is always a problem in a CFE, which you'll see more as we get to the day 3 case, okay? Okay, so here's the table again. Let's move on to the next slide. Let's look at day 3 now. So 3 cases in day 3, which is very classical. We typically get 3 cases. The first case had no FR issues. It was more focused on management accounting, assurance, and finance. There were a lot of MA questions in there. From assurance, it was things like due diligence and WIR and things like that. Nothing too complex. It was very easy, breadth level, core level assurance and finance topics there. The second case did have FR issues. It was about foreign currency, and it was ASPE. So foreign currency is one of the complex topics. I had it in my table, I believe. So it is something I do recommend that you study. And it also has some questions on tax, but very high level questions on what was on tax. We also had non-monetary transactions, another FR question. And then there was a big focus on management accounting. And there was something very interesting that they did on the third case here. Keep that in mind. I'll talk about it in just a few moments. But the third case in day 3 had something very interesting. I'll make sure to cover it in just a moment. The top feedback that I got on day 3, what it was very, very time constrained. I hear that every year. It's very time constrained. And there were a lot of MA questions in there. So it made it quite hard to tackle because MAs do take quite a bit of time. Here are your strategies for day 3. You have to have a breadth of knowledge, which essentially means you have to scratch the surface on everything, but do not go into depth, do not go into detail and study all the competencies that are outside of FR, MA, or your role. Okay, I'm going to say it one more time. Do not go outside of your FR, MA, and your role. Those are the 3 areas that you want to study really well. FR, MA, and your role. Go into depth in there. But when it comes to all other topics, just scratch the surface. Just high-level knowledge will do it. You don't have time in day 3 to put a lot of details, so just avoid it. Just study a little bit, and that should be okay. Again, understand the passing profile, and be sure to manage your time. That's the end of May CFE. It's all behind us. It was last week. Let's look forward. Let's look at where we are right now and how September is going to shape things. I'm going to give you some statistics on what AOs are coming up, actually the number of AOs that are coming up, to give you like a baseline on how to prepare for it. So here's the same table that we looked at earlier. I just add a couple more things to it. So as of now, we are seeing a pattern that we're getting about 13 to 14 AOs in day 2. Now, if you do the math, you have like 5 hours and you have 13 AOs to do, and you have to write in depth. That's not a lot of time. So be careful, make sure to spend adequate amount of time on all those AOs to get C's, because that's what you need to pass day 2. I talked about the gap already. And if you look at the role, it's pretty much the same. It is about 7 or 8 AOs that every role gets. So it is pretty fair, pretty equal. But the key here is that if you remember the passing profile, to pass through level 3, which is your role level, you have to get a lot of C's in your role. Interestingly enough, we have 6 AOs for the common area, FR plus MA, but there's about 7 or 8 for your role, right? So there's more AOs for your role. And you only have one chance to pass the 3rd level, which is your role level. So please don't run out of time on your role. Make sure to allocate your time appropriately and spend maybe a little bit more time on your role just to make sure you cover all those issues, okay? Interesting enough, in day 2, the case booklet gives you the common questions and then your role questions. And naturally, people do it in order. So they spend too much time in a common question and they run out of time in their role, but that's a bad idea. If you're wondering how many students write each role, I've given you some statistics based on my analysis. So about 74% of all students choose assurance as their role. I told you it's the most popular one. And I don't think it's because of most people are writing from public practice. I don't think that's the reason. I simply think assurance is widely known as one of the easier roles to pass. So again, I do recommend taking assurance or PM. Finance and tax are really not that popular. Not a lot of students take it. But if you have taken finance or tax, you know what, don't worry about it. You can still pass this exam with either of those options, but it's just not popular compared to the others. Let's look at day 3 now. Let's look at the statistics for day 3. We have about 18 to 22 AOs in day 3. It's a lot. 22 AOs in day 3 in like 4 hours. That's a lot of AOs to cover. And I found that in 2021 May, the number was around 20, 19 to 20. This is not official. The numbers in red are just based on student debriefs. When the cases are released, I can update this with the official numbers, but so far this is from student debriefs. We're getting about 3 questions from all secondary non-FR/MA questions, and about 2 questions from FR and about 4 to 5 in MA. So the key here, the key takeaway from the slide is that you're going to get a chance to do FR and MA in day 3, and you should always prioritize them and work more on FR and MA in day 3, because if you know the passing profile of the CFE, you have to get depth in FR and MA, so you have 2 days to do good on them. So if you did really bad in day 2, remember in day 3 you can catch up. You'll get a couple more FR and MA questions. Okay, let's move on to the next slide now. There's nothing else really we can take from the slide. This is telling how many minutes each of the cases are. Remember earlier I said they did something funny with the third case. Here's something I want you to notice about this slide. This is number of minutes per case in day 3, right? It's like 80 minutes, 90 minutes, 70 minutes. You'll notice that almost every CFE, the first case had about 80 to 90 minutes. And then the last case in the last 3 years was the shortest one, right? It was like 70, 75. In 2016, it wasn't the case, but in any other year, it was about 70 minutes. So there's 2 takeaways in here. They're putting a shorter case in the end, and usually it has easier AOs. So the way they're trying to trick you here is that you're going to start working on the first case, you're going to spend too much time, you get to the second case, and when you get to the third case, you have no more time left. But the third case was the easiest one, it was the shortest one, and you missed out on all the AOs. So there's 2 takeaways. Number 1, make sure you get to the third case by budgeting your time appropriately. And the second takeaway is this. In 2021 May, what they did is this. They put a lot of AOs, not only complexities, but they put a lot of AOs in the third case. It was only 70 minutes, but there were a lot of AOs in there. So students who were not managing their time, and when they got to the third case and they had only like 50 minutes left, they were in big trouble, because you have 70 minutes to tackle so many AOs, and you hammered your time budget. So the takeaway is, please budget your time and give yourself enough time on the third case of day 3 so that you tackle all the AOs, because they are trying to trick you by putting more AOs there or making it a little bit easier so that you don't get to it on time. All right, so that was where we are now. Let's look at September CFE and how to exactly prepare for it. So I kind of talked about a little bit about the format. The reality is that most provinces are getting vaccinated at a really high rate, so the restrictions are getting lifted. We have got confirmation that the September PEP exams are going to be remote. So Core 1, Core 2 electives, they're not going to be done at the exam centers. They'll be done at home, just like it was done in the last 2 years. And the institute that I teach in personally, we've also reverted back to face-to-face teaching. So in my opinion, the CFE is likely to be at the exam centers, in my opinion, but we really don't know. To be honest, I was really surprised that the PEP exams were changed to remote. I really thought that the way the health officials are announcing the vaccinations rates, I really thought by September, everything is going to open. I mean, that's what the plan is, right, in most provinces, including Ontario and BC. But I don't know at this point. I really think it'll be at the exam center. But the thing is, it doesn't matter. Even if it is in a hotel room or exam center, you'll be okay. Writing in a hotel room, except for that darkness issue, it doesn't really matter. It's the same as in exam center. The only thing is, in a hotel room, I feel like it's a little bit easier because you have privacy and it's a little bit quieter. Often students ask me this question, is it going to be IFRS or ASPE in day 2? Which one should I study? Because it takes a long time to study both of them. And when students ask me this question, I ask them another question. Is it going to be sunny or cloudy on your CFE days? And you know what the answer is? I don't know. I don't know, and it doesn't matter, because whether it's IFRS or ASPE, no one can predict it, and you should be ready for both of them. some new things that are going to be on this CFE that you're writing. There'll be the DAIS competency, data analytics. As I mentioned, the competency map was updated. So now we have a new data analytics AOs that they want to test you on. I'll talk more about this a little bit later, but essentially this is about computer systems and data and graphs. And it's about you analyzing graphs, interpreting it, and giving recommendation to the company. You may get tested on DAIS on your day 1, day 2, or day 3 on either of the days. Interestingly enough, there's not a lot of learning materials on DAIS. The learning ebook hasn't been updated with any information last time I checked, and there's virtually no information on what it is, but they're saying it is examinable. They confirm with me that they're going to test you on DAIS, or they can test you on it. So please prepare for it. And I do have a resource for DAIS, which I'll tell you more about it at the end of this webinar. I think for big picture is going to be a big deal in day 1. I think you should be ready for it, and you should be ready to find it, because I'm seeing it come up over and over. It'll be time constrained like all CFEs, and I do think that you will get more complex FRCOs, and the board of examiners who does the CFE has confirmed that yes, they will be putting more of this. So here's my 5-step suggestion on how you should prepare for your CFE. I suggest that you, number 1, understand this exam, the structure, format, AOs, all of it. Prepare a study plan. Start studying right now, start with technical studies, and then get marking and support to help you get good at case writing and technicals and so on. So I'll go through each one of those steps very briefly, and I'll explain what I mean so that you have a solid plan on how to tackle your exam this September. So to understand the CFE, there's a lot of resources out there. I didn't want to spend too much time in this webinar to talk about what is the structure of the CFE. I do it every year. Instead, I create a video on YouTube that just explains the CFE. I suggest you watch that video to understand the exam. And then in these webinars, I'll just keep updating you what's happening. So watch YouTube videos, read the blueprint of the CFE, and you'll quickly understand what the exam is about. The Capstone 2 workshop is also a great resource for you to understand it. For step 2, I really suggest that you prepare a study plan, because without a study plan, it's like you're going on a trip without a map. You're going to be doing things very randomly, and you're not going to get anything done. So I recommend creating a very solid study plan so that you know what you're going to study every time. Students often ask me how many weeks should I take off before the CFE. For PEP candidates, I recommend 3 to 8 weeks off. So let's say like July and August, you should take off. And for international trained accountants, I recommend 3 to 8 weeks of completely being off work, and also starting technicals 3 months before, because you're a little bit rustier and you don't know technicals as well as PEP candidates. Okay, so this is when you should start studying, essentially when you should start building a study plan. Now you are going to get a study plan from Capstone 2. It's going to look like something like this. This is given to you in Capstone 2. It's already available publicly, and it just tells you every day what cases you're going to have to submit. I don't like this. I don't like this study plan because it has very few things in there. It just says what cases you have to submit for marking, and then when the CFE is, but it's not very detailed enough. Instead, I propose to make a study plan kind of like this. On the left side, you're seeing Excel version, and on the right side is the Word version. I recommend to create a study plan where in every week, you're writing down what you're going to study. For example, on the Excel file on the left, it's a template study plan from my course. It essentially tells you that in the beginning, you should study technicals, and then mix it up with the day 3 cases. Then when you begin with Capstone 2, work on day 2 and day 3 cases leading up to the exam. I think Excel is the best one, to be honest, because with the Excel file, you can insert rows and you can write down specifically what cases to work on. What you're seeing now is just a template, but you can build it up and write specific case names and what you're going to do every day. But I think Excel will work great. If you're not a fan of Excel, which I don't think that's the case, you're an accountant, but you can also use Microsoft Word. There's another template that we have on the right side. This one shows essentially how you can write what you're going to do every day in a Word format, Word calendar. That also works really well. I've used both of them. I think both are effective. I'll let you decide which one you want to use, but I do recommend that you use one of those. As a third step, I recommend you start studying right now. It is really never too early because there's so much content to cover. When you get to Capstone 2, you're essentially going to get old CFE cases. Okay, I'm going to say it one more time. Capstone 2 just gives you old CFE cases, and there's a lot of them. I counted 70 cases. And just to be clear, 70 cases includes CFE and also UFE cases. UFE was the exam before 2015, before CPA designation was formed, before it was amalgamated by the other designations. But you know what? A lot of UFE cases have good technicals, so I do recommend doing a few UFEs. So if you look at the number, that's a lot of cases. And in Capstone 2, you will get all those cases, but you're not going to write like every single one of them. The way the schedule works is only a few of them are covered, not a few of them, sorry, a big chunk of them, but not all of them are covered. And you're definitely not going to send all of them for marking. Only a few of them are marked by the National Marking Center. I mean, most students just go beyond the capstone 2 schedule and do all those cases. The point is that it takes a lot of time, so you can start studying early. And here's another good news. All the cases that I've shown here, all the 70 cases, are publicly available. You don't have to wait to get to capstone 2 to get those cases and work on them. They're publicly available on CPA Canada's Resource Center. The only problem is they're mixed in with big PDF files, so you have to go through the hassle of printing them, but they are available. So you can already get started downloading them and attempting those cases. Of all the days, there's very few day 1 cases. There's only 3 day 1 cases, and they're not publicly available. All of it is, which I just mentioned, but the day 1 cases are not publicly available. They're only in capstone 2. So only students in capstone 2 will get it. If you're someone not taking capstone 2, then you're in trouble because you're not going to get any practice versions of your WDI case for the CFE, right? And I have a solution for you though. I'll tell you what the solution is in just a moment in a few slides. I recommend starting with technicals, your study process, and to focus on FRMA role, which I already mentioned a few times. It is really important that you find what technical study style works for you. The 3 methods that I think are working really good are creating flashcards, summary sheets, and memory aids. I recommend using the learning ebook as your main resource for studying technicals, and you can download summary PDFs of every chapter in the learning ebook. I think it's a great resource. I recommend to all the students writing the CFE. And there's also flashcards available in the capstone 2 module. The flashcards are kind of like you see over here. They're white flashcards. You download them, you can print them, and on one side it'll have the competency, and on the other side you will have the description of what it is. All right, I have some cool tips for you for technicals. I'm going to give you guys some cool memory aids to learn the FR content, the technicals. I do this every year in my webinars. I give you a lot of memory aids, and I always add new memory aids. So if you watch this webinar on my YouTube channel, I have some new ones that I'm going to give you. So memory aids are essentially clever ways to remember technicals. Because there's so much content on there, you want to kind of crunch it down to small, easy to remember ways. So here's a memory aid for you. If you have employee versus contractor tax question, and you're wondering, oh my God, what are the tests for the employee versus contractor? Just think ICOK. That's a really good way to remember all the components of this discussion. There's 6 components of it. So just think ICOK and write those 6 points down, and that'll be your tax employee versus contractor test. Okay, audit. One of the common AOs for audit is using Auditor's Expert. And for this one, it is Cooked Expert. That's the memory aid that I teach to my students. Cooked Expert is a memory aid to remember all the components of what you're supposed to do when you have an audit expert, like how you're supposed to tackle it. You just put down all those points, you discuss them, and you'll get points for it. Here are the assertions. I can't take credit for this one. I learned it from a facilitator, but I changed it up a little bit to make it easier to remember. Basically, there's 2 assertions, income statement and balance sheet, and within it, you have multiple assertions. I like to use memory aid. Is Coca served in Boston? Is means income statement, Boston means balance sheet. So when you think is Coca, that's income statement assertions. Served in Boston, that tells you that it's like balance sheet assertions. Here's another one. This is for intangible assets. This is a clever way to remember the components for internally developed intangible assets, aka R&D. So think IC Feb, like whole IC February, then Feb CRM, like February and CRM, customer relationship management, and IC Farm. Those are very, very easy ways to remember this, because instead of memorizing the whole paragraphs, just remember those short words and it will come to you during the exam. I use it personally when I was writing my CFE, and I found it helps me tremendously. Here's another one for betterment for FR issues. Remember better clock. So clock, QLOQ, stands for quantity, life, operating cost, and quality. Those are the things that get affected during betterment. The quantity increases, the life increases, operating cost decreases, and quality increases. And here's a new one, balance scorecard. Think cliff. Okay, think of yourself balancing on a cliff. So if you get a balance scorecard question, the 4 perspectives on it are customer, learning and growth, internal, and financial. So just let it come to your mind. I'm balancing on a cliff, and write down those perspectives so you tackle the balance scorecards. And if anybody here is thinking, am I allowed to do this? Can I just write those keywords? The thing is, keywords are okay in a CFE, especially for FR. They are okay. Here's a comment from a CFE marker, And she told me that she prefers marking point form because it actually helps her go through the process much easier. She encourages students to write in point form because it is more concise. There are not a lot of paragraphs. Just putting 2 or 3 words from there lets the marker know that you know what you're talking about. So it's totally fine, and it works. It's a really great way of tackling a lot of items. Like you can see here a testimonial from one of my students who said that he used memory aids, and he also used outlining, which is another cool trick you can use, and it helped him stay organized and answer all the AOs. The memory aids really do work quite well. So I do recommend that you make a note of them and use them in your CFE, and have my fingers crossed that one of my memory aids comes up on your CFE, and you're gonna leave me a comment on my YouTube video that it worked. And here's the last step. So get marking and support. So even though you go through all those 4 steps, you may get to the 5th step and you may be thinking, I'm still not getting it. I still feel uncomfortable about the CFE. And the thing is, if you just keep writing cases, you're not going to learn anything because no one's really marking your cases. So the problem is that you need to practice more cases and technicals, but you don't know how to study for CFE. Like at this point, a lot of you probably haven't started Capstone 2, I don't know, depending when you're watching this video. And the fact that in Capstone 2 you have no facilitator, you're on your own from here on to the CFE. You don't really have any resources. So that creates a problem that A, you need to study early, but B, you don't know how to study because CFE is still a mystery for you. You don't really know how to exactly study for it. There's no really like a clever way to prepare for the program. So, all right, so what do I suggest? What do I suggest that you do? How can you study early without getting ready for it? Well, there are support options available for you. And you don't have to break your bank to get support. There's both free and paid options. You can just get a lot of free resources. For example, you can get a study partner and study together through mentors, through various social media channels like Facebook, Reddit. However, if the free resources are not sufficient for you, you can go with the paid support options. You can hire a tutor, and tutors essentially sit down with you, you pay them by the hour, and they help you prepare for the CFE. The good thing with tutors is that there's no commitment. You just pay them by the hour, and you can call them whenever you need them. So there's very flexible. The problem with tutors is that they don't really have any materials to offer you. They're just going to sit down and just explain things to you. So a lot of students opt for prep schools, and prep schools are essentially this big organization with about 12 people in their team who have a lot of videos and lessons and supplemental materials. Or if you don't want to consider those 2 options, you can go somewhere in the middle and go for a coaching program. And coaching program is something that I like to say I created, but it may not be true, but I kind of made it famous. It's kind of like a mix of tutoring and prep schools. You get that one-on-one personalized experience, but at the same time, you get supplemental materials. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. And having said that, I want to tell you about my coaching program called CFE Review. It has a ton of materials in there. I mark cases. It's number 1 because I think that's the key to getting good at CFE. I give you a lot of lessons on time management, on outlining cases. I give a lot more memory aids, some supplementary drills, checklist, study plan. A lot of content is in my program. It's huge, and it's very successful. Here's a screenshot of how I'm marking the cases. I mark 7 cases as part of the program. And as you can see in the screenshot, I go in detail. I don't just mark high level. I try to give you feedback on every single paragraph so that you know where you're going wrong, because you really need that specialized feedback. The lessons are face-to-face. It's not someone speaking over the PowerPoint because it gets very boring. You will see me present in front of camera, and there's a lot of lessons and step-by-step walkthroughs on how to answer a case from scratch to nothing. I have historical CFE data where I teach you what questions specifically came up on each CFE, so to help you better focus your studies. There are a lot of templates that will help you write your cases in a more efficient manner and save on time. And for this year, for September 2021, I've added even more things to my program. I've added a mock WDI case. I mentioned earlier that the 3 Capstone 2 versions of WDI are not publicly released. If you're not taking Capstone 2, you're not going to get your copy of it. And even if you get 3 copies in Capstone 2, it's not enough. So I created my own version of practice cases. If you know who I am, if you've seen my material before, I author CPA cases. I have Core 1, Core 2 assurance cases, and I just released the WDI mock exam practice case. So it's a material that you can purchase it on its own. It's on my website, or you can get it as part of my program if you sign up for my program. And the DAIS, I know it's in your competency, and a lot of you are wondering how to study for it. So I'm happy to announce I released a practice drill for DAIS. It is a very realistic example of what you might see on your exam. I strongly believe that if they test you on DAIS, it'll be like in my practice drill, because the way I designed it is, from my experience, I believe that's how it's going to be examined. So I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be super helpful for DAIS competency. I also have a bridging document for WDI to help you understand what this case is about. I actually have bridging documents for all prior day one cases, so you can practice even prior day one cases should you need to. A private WhatsApp study group. It's very flexible. You can submit cases for marking anytime you want. There's no fixed days for submitting for marking, and you can join anytime. There's no fixed start date for my program. It's ongoing and you can join anytime. I have a lot of testimonials from my students over here. I couldn't fit all of them on the screen. I have way more than this, but I encourage you to do your own independent research and look for more testimonials on social media, Reddit, and YouTube. So thank you for your time. And I appreciate your time. Yeah, I know it's quite late in Ontario, but thank you for staying up for this. And now I'll just take any questions that you have for me.